So just a couple of things before we make a start on the actual lecture. I'm sure everyone is aware that we are going to be running a social tonight at 8:30. All the links and details are in the Facebook group on the social, Sports Diver page. You can also see the fundraising link in this chat. It's in aid of the RNLI. So we just ask for a small contribution of around £5 when you join, just as a voluntary donation. We'll see how much money we can raise for the RNLI. So hope to see you all there. Do just remember, if you do donate, please try and gift aid it. It just gets a bit more money for free, which is always nice. So we'll make a start on the actual lecture. Tonight, it's a bit of a mix of some numbery stuff and a bit of kind of unique equipment. So just quickly make a start. What we're going to cover tonight, backwards. So this module really covers the breathing gas planning and equipment configurations that we use to try and change our equipment gas planning. Oh, there's no animation. Brilliant. So we're going to go over planning our gas consumption. So we've looked at our decompression planning. Now we're going to go over our gas consumption, and we're going to look at how we incorporate emergency provisions into that planning as well. We're going to look at different types of equipment configurations. Now that you're sports divers, you'll come across some slightly more unique equipment. So as you can see in the gentleman in the picture's got another dive bottle in between his legs with a regulator on it, but not attached to a BCD. So we'll talk a little bit about strange equipment configurations that you might not have come across before. We'll look at maintenance of breathing equipment, why it's important, how often you need to do it, and what they actually do in the maintenance. And then a quick look at updating or buying new equipment and how you go about that. So the first thing we're going to cover is planning gas for the dive. So this should be kind of harking back a little bit to your ocean diver training. So some of this is going to be a bit of a recap. So the main thing that we think about when we come to gas planning is the rule of thirds. Can anyone type in the chat or shout out what the rule of thirds actually means? Hoping that everyone can remember this. Yep, so Joe's absolutely right. Our rule of thirds basically says we have 1/3 of a gas supply for descent and to the halfway point, like so. We have another third from the turnaround point to the exit, and then a final third that we don't plan on using as a reserve. So that's not something you should be using to get to the surface or have a longer decompression stop or anything like that. Okay, so that's the fundamental rule that governs our gas planning, the rule of thirds. So how do we actually plan how much gas is required for the dive? How do we know what size cylinder we need? So that's what we're going to cover tonight. So the amount of gas that we need depends on a couple of things. One of them is your personal breathing rate. So that is how many liters per minute that you consume as a diver. It varies between different people on stuff like fitness, your energy output. So larger people, more athletic people tend to have a higher breathing rate. Your body temperature. If you're nervous, you'll have a higher breathing rate. A general safe rule of thumb, BSAC prescribe, is 25 liters per minute. Now, from experience, that's very conservative. If you're going above 25 liters per minute, it normally means you're doing something strenuous or you're bricking yourself for some reason. So 25 liters is relatively conservative. You can work out your own breathing rate relatively easily. Just record how much pressure is in your cylinder at the start of a dive, how much pressure is in your cylinder at the end of a dive, and then just work out how many liters you consumed throughout the dive. So another thing that really determines your consumption rate is the depth of the dive. So that 25 liters per minute is something called surface air consumption. So that's how many liters of air you'd consume on the surface. Now, what changes as we go deeper in the water in terms of our kind of gas and pressures and everything? So on the surface, we have 1 bar of atmospheric pressure, don't we? If we're at 10 meters, can people type in the chat how many bars of atmospheric pressure we would have at 10 meters? Absolutely right, so 2 bar. And so at 30 meters, it's what? 4 bar, absolutely. So every 10-meter increase, we get an increase of 1 bar. So at 0 meters, it's 1 bar. At 10 meters, it's 2 bar. At 20 meters, it's 3 bar. At 30 meters, it's 4 bar, and so on. So the depth of our dive determines the pressure of the gas that we're breathing at. The whole point of the scuba set is it adjusts the pressure of the gas we breathe so that our lungs don't just collapse. So when we are at depth, we will be using physically more gas because that gas is at a higher pressure, which means if we were breathing that gas on the surface at atmospheric pressure, the actual volume the gas takes up would be much greater. So the deeper we go, the faster we consume our air consumption, or air reserves rather. Obviously, the duration of the dive can have an effect on that. The more you breathe from it, the less gas you have. That's relatively self-explanatory. So now we can combine those 3 factors, your breathing rate, the depth of the dive, and the duration, into a little equation. So the amount of gas that we will need for a dive is your 25 litres per minute breathing rate, the absolute pressure in bar, so that's relating to your depth. So as we said, at 20 meters, it's 3 bar. And then the time that you spend at that depth in minutes. Okay, so if you put all those together and multiply them together, that should give us the amount of gas in liters that we will need for that dive. Okay, so let's take that a little bit further and look at how we can determine what size of cylinder we need for the dive. So how do we actually even work out how much gas we have in a cylinder? So it's pretty simple. We times the cylinder in liters by the bar pressure. So a cylinder at 1 bar, so it's just atmospheric pressure, will have the same number of liters as its descriptive name. So if we have a 12-litre cylinder at 1 bar, it'll have 12 litres of air in it. But if we now pressurize that cylinder to 2 bar, so we double the pressure, we double the volume of that cylinder being contained in gas. So we end up having 24 litres of air. And we can just take that rule and multiply it up. So if we have a 10-litre cylinder at 230 bar, we actually have 2,300 litres of air. Is that clear to everyone? Hands up, anyone who struggles with that a little bit? No, everyone's happy with that. Brilliant. So now let's combine that with our last equation and figure out whether a dive to 20 meters for 20 minutes on a 10-litre cylinder is okay. So pulling that equation we had from the last slide, our breathing rate, 25 litres per minute, the absolute pressure, and the dive time. Put the numbers in. So we have 25 litres per minute. Our absolute pressure at 20 meters is 3 bar, as you all correctly said. And then our dive time, as said in the question, is 20 minutes. That means we need 1,500 litres. Now, does that mean that our 10-litre cylinder has enough gas, or are we missing a step? So that 1,500 litre figure is exactly how many litres of gas that we will be breathing for that duration of dive. That has no reserve built into it. So really, we need to look at this as if it represents 2/3 of our gas supply. Okay. So thinking like that, we then divide that 1,500 by 2. Okay, that gives us 750. And then that means that's 1/3 of our gas supply. So really, what we actually need is to add another 750 litres. So our actual gas requirement is 2,250 litres. Hands up, anyone who isn't happy with that kind of calculation. Everyone's happy. Oh, 1. Okay, no problem. So could you just type in the chat what you struggled with, Tash? Is there a particular point, or do you want me just to go over it again? Okay, so let's oh, this is really hard without drawing stuff. Okay, so let's go back to the start. This equation, let me get a laser pointer. This equation, you're happy with what this gives us. This gives us the number of litres that our body will consume at that depth for that amount of time. We're happy with that, okay? Now we need to go back to our rule of thirds. Where's that diagram? Here we go. So what we've just calculated, that 1,500 litres, will only give us enough gas for this part of our dive, okay? So it assumes we drop down to 20 meters straight away, move along there, and then go straight back up. That's what it assumes. Okay, so that's 1,500 litres consumed there. Now, with rule of thirds, we need to have 1/3 of our gas supply as a reserve. So we need to account for this in our calculation. There's the reserve. I'll skip forward again. We need to account for that. Okay, so we know that this, you get it now? Okay, I'll finish explaining in case anyone else wasn't sure. So this 1,500 litres, that's only 2/3 of that dive because we showed on that diagram. Yeah, skip all the way back. That's the 1,500 litres. So that's only 2/3. So we see that as 2/3. That means we need to add an extra third onto that. So to do that, because it's 2/3, we divide it by 2. That would give us a third. So 1/3 of that would, or not exactly 1/3, but 1/3 of our breathing supply would be 750 litres. So we add that to the 1,500, and that gives us 2,250 litres. So hopefully everyone's happy with that. What that means is we can then compare that to our litres in our cylinder, which we can see is slightly less. And so we know that a 10-litre cylinder will be suitable for that dive. That's a safe cylinder to use. Okay, so let's have a little bit more of a look at calculating the reserve, because that's the gist of it. That's basically all you need to know. Now we just need to look at it from different angles. So let's calculate the reserve. So again, let's do a dive to 20 meters for 20 minutes. So same again, our breathing rate and all that. So we know that we need 1,500 litres to actually breathe from. That represents 2/3 of that dive. So we need to add an extra third reserve. So they've done it times 1.5. Okay. You can also do it by dividing that by 2 and then timesing it by 3, and that'll give you the total number as well. So there's multiple ways of doing this, whatever you're comfortable with. So 1.5, and that gives us our 2,250 litres in total. So here's the caveat. This reserve is judged against any type of diving undertaken. Now this works for no ceiling diving, where you can just ascend to the surface in the event of a problem. If I was doing cave diving, for example, would a third of that gas be enough as a reserve? Or would I be worried about losing my gas supply halfway into the cave and then not having enough gas to get out? So depending on the diving you take, you need to be judging what actual reserve you need. So let's do a quick example. Pens and papers at the ready, and hopefully you guys will be able to get hold of this. So we want to do a dive to 25 meters for 20 minutes. Okay, we have the options of a 10-litre cylinder or a 12-litre cylinder. I would like you guys to work out for me which one I would need to take. I'll give you a couple of minutes and see what you come up with. Okay, so we've got some answers then. So I'll just go through this, and we can do another example at some point if people are still struggling. That's not a problem. But we'll just go through. If you're struggling, just pay attention, and hopefully this will give you an idea. So the first step that we take in this problem is figuring out how many litres of gas we have in each cylinder. So we do that by timesing your literage by the pressure. So 10 litres, it's 220 times 10, which is 2,200, and then 12 litres times 220 is 2,640 litres. Okay, so that tells us how many litres are in the cylinders. We then need to use that equation, breathing rate times the pressure times the dive time, and we know our dive details are 25 meters, which is 3.5 bar, and 20 minutes, which gives us a required liters of 1,750. Now we need to apply the rule of thirds. So we add a third reserve. So we times that by 1.5. So our reserve is 875 litres. We add that to 1,750, and that gives us a required litres of 2,625 litres. Is anyone stuck at this point or anywhere before then? Hands up if you're stuck. Brilliant. Or do what I said earlier and just times it by 1.5. Okay, so it gives you the same number. So what that means is, for us, we need that number of litres in our cylinder to have a safe dive. Does a 10 litre cylinder have that number of litres in? No, it doesn't. Does a 12 litre? Only just. So a 12 litre cylinder is needed for this dive. So I'm hoping everyone's happy with that. If you're not, put your hand up and we'll do another example. But if everyone's pretty content with that, we will move on. Cool. That's most of the mathsy stuff out of the way, so that's the hard stuff done. But now let's have a look at some emergency gas planning. So your gas consumption, let's have a little bit more of a detailed look at that. Your gas consumption is determined by the depth that you're breathing at. We mentioned that earlier because the scuba set delivers that gas at the ambient pressure. Your time to ascend and your settle time. So if we're thinking about an emergency, okay, we need to also consider how long it takes to us to actually get to the surface. So I'm not going to skip all the way back to the original slide, but if you remember that original slide that we had with our dive profile, where pen doesn't work. There we go. Brilliantly straight line, where we have our dive split up. What on earth is going on here? Split up into 3 sections like that. Ignore the big wobbly mark. So we had our profile like this, and then our third reserve in this area. Notice that we have an ascent at the start and a ascent at the end and a descent at the start. I have no idea what's going on with this, so I'm just going to get rid of it. But yeah, we need to consider that ascent and the descent as well. So any ideas roughly how long it takes to ascend from kind of 30 meters? Any guesses? Bonus points for anyone who can quote the BZAC prescribed maximum ascent rate. So I think Tom's got the general gist. 15 meters per minute is your maximum ascent rate, up to 6 meters, and then at least a minute from 6 meters. Okay, so let's consider that in our emergency gas planning as well. We also need to consider any decompression stops that are required. If you're doing decompression diving, that's now an overhead environment. It's basically cave diving because you can't just ascend to the surface. Now, in reality, if you actually run out of air, which is pretty unlikely if you're at that sort of level, but if you do, decompression stops are kind of optional at that point. We've figured out how to fix decompression illness. We haven't figured out how to fix drowning yet. So if you're stuck with that choice, blow through the decompression stops and get to the surface where you can actually breathe. Another thing that's going to come into our kind of calculations is any sort of stress underwater. So end of the dive to the first stop check depth, and then out of gas as well. So if we have an out of gas situation, our buddy is going to be breathing off our scuba set. So that's going to increase the consumption rate. Okay, so that's going to accelerate that breathing rate, and we can see breathing rates in excess of 100 litres a minute. And what that really means is if you run the numbers, if you say have a half full 12-litre cylinder at 20 meters, you will empty that cylinder, you and your buddy will empty that cylinder in 3 minutes. Empty it, not just T reserve, literally empty. So your breathing rate has a huge impact on your emergency gas planning, which is why it's so important that we have alternate supplies. I've kind of already answered the question. If you lose the supply of gas, that's it, that's curtains, that's the end of your life. So that's really important we have an alternate supply of gas, okay? It's urgent to re-establish that air supply. I think everyone can agree on that. And any sort of buddy pair is always important for you to have an alternate supply. So you see in the bottom right-hand picture and in the top picture, there's an alternate supply being used by the buddy. Okay. So you guys have all been in the pool before. You've all done the CBL and AS Ascent stuff. What we can't teach you in the pool, unfortunately, is how stressful these situations actually are. And it's tricky to kind of pin this down to one thing because the incident reports have so many different factors. BSAC say they have a poor chance of success. If you do a actual proper AS, sorry, I haven't explained that very well. When it says sharing techniques, what they're talking about is a technique we don't even teach anymore because it's generally regarded as dangerous, where no one carries an alternate source of a regulator. If this diver runs out of air, they will breathe from this diver's primary demand valve, and they will swap between each diver, each breath, as they ascend. So you literally have a regulator out of your mouth and you both breathe off one regulator. So it's a really old technique that isn't really taught anymore because it's so dangerous. And in a situation where someone's about to drown, they tend not to give it back to you, is what was found. So they've kind of banned that. I don't really know why that's still in the slides. That shouldn't really be there, but which is why everyone carries an AS now. That's just kind of given for you guys. We've always taught you to carry AS, so don't worry too much about that. What I was going to get at was in these situations, we can't really simulate the stress. And so the panic of finding the regulator, getting it detached, all that sort of stuff, that's why we do these drills over and over and over again. So, little quiz. We all love a quiz. First question, list 2 factors that might affect our breathing rate. There's a couple of these, so you've got a bit of a selection. So everyone just type in the chat 2 different options that can affect the breathing rate of a diver or even a scuba set. Yeah, I think everyone gets the gist. So fitness is a good one. Slightly unfit people will maybe consume a little bit more air. Energy output, if you're doing a lot of work or anything like that, it can really increase your liters per minute. Temperature, cold tends to make you breathe faster. Any sort of nervousness as well tends to make you breathe faster. No one's mentioned the idea of having 2 divers breathe off a single scuba set. That can increase the breathing rate on the scuba set. Cool, but I think everyone basically got the idea. What is the rule of thirds is the next question. This is such an important part of the training. It's fundamental in your gas planning system, so you always need to remember this. And while they're doing that, Imi, you're ready to start sharing?
Hopefully, if I can get it to work.
Fantastic.
I can.
Cool. While they're answering that, we'll swap over.
Well, I'm going to go all the way through this. What's a hill this week? Is no one going to put what the rule of thirds is? Am I missing something? Yeah, for that, Barney?
Yep, I think everyone's got the idea.
Cool, yeah, so you've got a third to your halfway or your turnaround point, a half to your way back and your exit from the water, and then a third, which is your spare. So I'm going to talk about different configurations of this alternate source. There's one common one all you guys are used to, but there is lots of different options for these. No one configuration is suitable for everyone. It doesn't work for everyone. The one that we use in the pool is kind of a bit universal. As you go through your diving career, you'll see a lot more different options. It's going to be appropriate to your diving conditions. So, like I said, not all of them will work with different kit setups. We're going to think about the advantages, the disadvantages, and the practicalities of all these different types of configuration. So the first one is this BC demand valve. Now, some of you might have noticed there's one BC in the pool that has like a full-on mouthpiece on the inflator hose, which you can see in this diagram here. And that's what we call a BC demand valve. The advantage of that is that you don't have another hose. It's just on your inflator hose. You don't have to have another bit coming off, so you're not going to get as entangled in things if that's like a worry for you. But the disadvantage is there's no protection against like the actual if your breathing gas supply fails, like the first stage on your actual the bit that's attached to the cylinder. If that fails, then both of your regulators out of use. Your body can't use that. It's just not practical. It's so close to you and your face. There's no like movement in that hose. Similar to that, it just restricts your head movement. Like, you know, your inflate hose, you know it is right on your shoulder. You're gonna have contort yourself to be able to get to that. And if your body was using it for whatever reason, you've got to stay close together because there's literally no way there's any movement there. It's not like our hoses that kind of extend so you can look at each other. You'll have one person on your shoulder. So, and also you'll both be consuming air from the same cylinder. So like Barney said, your gas consumption will not only double, it can triple because you're both stressed. This is the one all you guys are used to seeing. It's your Optimus demand valve. It's yellow. You can see it. It's normally easy to read. The advantage can when you're doing your out of air situations or air ascent, you kind of present that to them, so it's easy for them to grab. You, as the diver, manage to keep your own regulator in, and then your body just has the other one, so you get to keep your own. It's got a long hose on it, generally longer than your second stage, so they can kind of maintain some distance, so you're not on top of each other. And you can also use it yourself. If for some reason your second stage fails, you can use that one instead. The disadvantages of that, again, the first stage on your cylinder, the bit that actually attaches to the cylinder, there's no protection against that failing. If that fails, then both of those second stages are out of use. Again, you're both breathing from the same cylinder. Your breathing rate will increase, so you'll go through your air quicker. You're breathing from the same first stage, which is the bit with all the hoses on, like I just said. And again, your first stage might not be used to the workload when two people are breathing off it at the same time, so it could fail, but they generally do. That BSEN 250A, it says that older regulators whose performance may have degraded should not be used. If it has an A at the end of it, so that 250A, it means that it's been manufactured since 2014. And that's designed to be used in this situation. This is something we don't have in the club. It's two independent regulators. So you can see there on the left, that's what you'd normally use to connect your regulators with. But this one's got a second port, so you can put another set of regulators into the same cylinder. The advantage of that is all the advantages of the one we just talked about. But now, if one of the first stages fails, like the one on the right, furthest away from the cylinder fails, you can isolate that one and turn it off and continue using the other one. Disadvantages, there's more points of leakage there, so there's another O-ring, there's another port where it can fail, and again, you're both breathing that gas from the same cylinder. This here, so you can see a normal scuba setup, and then on the right hand side you've got a smaller cylinder that's attached to it. Usually 3 litres, that one on the right there will be about a 3 litre cylinder. Bearing in mind ours are like 12 litres, they're generally quite small, and they have their own regulator attached. The advantage of that being that if your gas supply, your first stage, your cylinder is kaput, you actually have a whole nother system to breathe from. So if anything goes wrong with yours, you've got a whole nother setup. And you've got additional gas, so I mean, you could factor that into your diving. And it's fairly light. I mean, the 12 litres are very heavy. These 3 litre cylinders, although it looks about the same length, they're quite light, quite skinny, and you wouldn't really notice it. A disadvantage of that, if you're doing a really deep dive or a long dive, or you need to do decompression stops, we've just said that if you and your buddy are breathing 100 litres a minute, you can run out of half of a 12 litre cylinder in 4 minutes. So you can imagine that a 3 litre cylinder isn't going to last very long. It is just an emergency situation. So if you're doing decompression, that's not going to last you very long. Here's a more commonly seen setup. So that's a twin set of cylinders. So you can have twin 7s up to twin 12s. Like, you know, you can have various different configurations of this. And they've both got their own regulators. So it's literally just wearing 2 cylinders. The same advantage as a poly cylinder, because obviously they're independent sets in themselves with different regulators and different first stages. So if one is broken, you can completely rely on the other one. And rather than having like a 12 litre and a 3 litre, you've now got 2 7 litres or 2 10 litres. So there's a greater gas capacity in your good one if one of them doesn't work. With the pony, you might get unbalanced trim. So if you've got a 12 litre central and then you put a 3 litre on the side, if that weighed 3 kilos, you're 3 kilos right hand side. So you might start to lose your trim and not be as horizontal anymore. Whereas this, because they're both the same size, you should ideally be flat. What you've got to consider here, because you've got 2 sets of regulators, these tanks are going to have 2 different pressure gauges. So you've got to keep an eye on both of them to make sure you're not running out of gas in either. Some people will breathe for 5 minutes off the left-hand regulator and then 5 minutes off the right-hand regulator and switch between the two, just to keep the cylinders, keep them around the same pressure. Disadvantages of that would be if your regulator fails on your left-hand cylinder, that cylinder is now completely out of use, and you have to rely on the right-hand side. There's no way you can regain access to that gas in that cylinder. And you'll need extra buoyancy. These cylinders are heavy, so if you know, you're going to need a bigger wing or a bigger BC to be able to lift you up with all that extra weight. This is the same thing. So these twin cylinders have been manifolded, which is that bar across the top with the extra valve in the middle. Okay, and basically that's the isolation valve, and that you can close that and open it, so the 2 cylinders can act as one unit, or you can isolate them. The advantage of that is being that if you've got that manifold open, when you breathe, you're breathing from both the cylinders as a connected system, so you don't need to be able to switch between regulators. You're only monitoring one gas supply, so it will be double pressure, but you can see you only have to look at one gauge. You need to consider though that isolation valve, you think of where your cylinders in the back, the person who's wearing that kit, who's wearing those twins, needs to be able to reach over and turn that off themselves to isolate cylinders. They need to be able to access that. So if you've got any kind of shoulder injury or really short arms or something, when you are trying out your kit on the surface, you need to make sure you can reach that valve. The disadvantage of that would be there's more O-rings, so you've got your 2 regulators and then you've got your isolation valve in the middle. So additional O-rings, there's more places it can go wrong. I don't know if you've all been on Stony Weekend, we've had to change O-rings, change inserts, and that's just twice as much now because you've got 2 cylinders. Extra buoyancy again because they're heavy. Your alternate supply is ultimately a backup system. It's not there to be used. It's not meant for that. It's meant to be as a backup. The gas consumption, you've got to plan it for whatever kit you're diving with. And your reserve should only be used for emergencies. You shouldn't be going into that reserve. You shouldn't be like, I've got 12 litres, but there's something really interesting I want to look at, and I know I've got a spare 3 litres. Like, you shouldn't be thinking like that. You should never use that apart from an emergency situation. Don't ever use your emergency to extend the dive. So yeah, like I just said, if you see something interesting, don't think just because you've got a spare 3 litres you can go and have a look. You can't. With deeper dives, you shouldn't be taking like a 3 litre cylinder for like a 40 metre dive. It's not adequate spare. At that point, you'll be on twins, or you'll be carrying another full-size cylinder. And it's got to be adequate for yourself and your buddy in the most critical point of the dive. That means at the end of your dive and you've got decompression and then something goes wrong, you should have enough spare, you should have enough emergency gas that you can ascend safely. So if you are diving with decompression, you'll be taking a whole spare cylinder that you can both breathe from. The maintenance from these, you all know James and Mike are our kit officers. They do a lot of your maintenance for you, but I'm going to tell you about it now. That equipment you rely on us to keep your equipment safe so that when you go diving, it's all in test and it's not going to fail, right? So if you have your own kit, it's your responsibility then to get that tested. If you've got regulators, it's your responsibility to go and get them serviced yearly. You've got to ensure that all the kit is washed in fresh water after use. Stony Cove is fresh water. The pool, we take all the kit down to the showers. I know you guys used to when you did ocean diving, but obviously we can't do that anymore. But we wash it all off in the showers, clean water, get rid of the chlorine so it doesn't degrade any part of it. It removes the dirt. If you're diving in the sea, it removes the salt crystals because they can build up and make everything like crunchy, but then the salt can get in places it really shouldn't be. The equipment you use is serviced regularly by a competent technician, so someone that's qualified to oversee all of the servicing, with a guy called Jim. And it's treated with respect. We don't throw regulators on the floor. We don't bash first stages off the floor. If you damage that or chip it or leave that kit in a bad state, it can only get worse. So if you're leaving chips and dents and hoses are dropping on the floor, it can lead to issues that wouldn't have otherwise been present. Updating and buying new equipment. So when you're buying new equipment, you need to think, is this really what I need? So if you're diving as a sports diver to 35 meters, I wouldn't necessarily say that you need a twin set of 12s. But if you're going into deeper diving and longer diving, then totally that's something you could look at. If you're buying brand new kit, you don't want to have to rebuy in every other year. If someone's doing ocean diver this year, and they bought something that's only suitable to 18 meters, like a torch, for example, they bought something rated to 18 meters. I'm like, well, next year when you do sports diving, you have to buy a brand new one. So you've got to think. You don't buy things all for tech dive. You're not going to go out and buy a rebreather because you might need it in 10 years' time. But don't be buying kit that's only going to last you. You need to grow into it, really. And can you upgrade gradually? Can you buy something secondhand for half the price and then sell that when you move on? I know things go down in cost as time goes on, but can you buy something that will last you a few years that you can then move on from? Considering your complete system, that's all the kit that you own, everything that goes with you on your dive. So the overall weight of your equipment, if if you've got big heavy torches and different suits and additional cylinders, they're all gonna add weight to you. So you need to start thinking, is this BCD going to provide me with enough buoyancy, enough lift, or am I just going to sink like a stone? Check your buoyancy changes. So, like I just said, is your BC or your wing capable of lifting you and all your kit? That's something you would need to look into. And you go into shallow water, or you go into the pool, or you go to the 6 metre shelf at Stony Cove and try it out. You check it out. If you can descend, but then you're struggling to ascend, you're swimming up, then you clearly haven't got enough lift. If you're absolutely going to sink like a stone, or you're not sinking enough, you need some more weight. All these things are what you should be thinking about. Don't buy brand new kit and then immediately go into a new dive site when it's dark and you don't know what's going on. New kit takes a while to get used to. You need to adjust the straps on it. You need, if you've got a new wing, you need to adjust the straps, the waist belt, the weight. So it's something you need to get used to. You don't take it in on an advanced dive straight away. You would try it out first in a shallower, easier conditions. And your skills. So practice, practice, practice. I know it's difficult at the moment because we're not in the water. But as you get new kit, and you're trying to do AS ascents with someone that's bought a brand new wing, it can be really difficult to get your mind around because you're used to using the club kit and it's all the same for all of you. As a sports diver going on, sports diver, you're instructing, you're going on to dive leader, you'll be buying these bits of kit. So you need to make sure that you're practicing those skills on new kit. So diving with a buddy you've never dived with before. If one of you dive with me, you might not know how my wing works or something like that, someone with a rebreather. So practicing those skills makes it easier to apply to situations that you might come across when you're out diving with people you don't know. So quiz 2, after I've just rambled on. The first question is, what are the advantages using a twin cylinder, such as 2 cylinders, with the isolation manifold in the middle? So that's the extra valve. What's the advantages of that over the ones that don't have the isolation valve? So yeah, you don't need to switch your regulator, you don't need to be swapping between 2 to breathe from it. Throw my pen on the floor. And you don't need to monitor both gas pressures, so it will be the same because you've got the isolation open. Another thing, what is important, so they've got this isolation valve, who needs to be able to get to that, who needs to be aware of that? So it would be the person wearing the twins, so they need to be able to access their isolation valve and their buddy. So you might, when you go in and you're checking signals with each other, if someone's diving on twins, they might tell you, like, if I'm struggling to reach it, can you do it for me? If there's a free flow on one of the cylinders, you know what you need to do with that kit. And what does a pony comprise of? Like, if I told you that I've got a pony cylinder, what would you think I'm on about? So I've got a spare small bottle with its own regulator. Do we know what kind of size it would be in terms of litres? So it's a 3 litre cylinder, and let's say it's at 220 bar. How many litres of air would that give me? Can someone work that out? So 660 litres. So obviously compared to a 12 litre cylinder when you've got 2,600, you can see that it's not that significant, but it can help if your first stage, which is the top bit of your cylinder, the first bit, if that fails, that pony is going to be more useful than an octopus.
On a slight side note, a larger cylinder, if you're using like a 12 litre or a 10 litre cylinder with a separate reg on, we tend to call that a stage. It's kind of used in technical diving where they use different mixes of gases at different depths. But if you ever hear anyone referring to a stage, that's what they mean. It's basically just a big pony cylinder.
That's it for me in terms of this lecture. I would again like to remind you all there's a social at 8:30 tonight. The links are in the chat, in the Facebook page, so that's all on there. And also, if you're doing your Christmas shopping, easy fundraising is still going ahead. We've just got another, I think, £80 from that to go into the clubs. That's really good. So if you are online buying things, I think I raised a whole 17p today buying a dressing gown. So if you are buying anything online, get the widget for Google Chrome, and it's free for you, so I'd recommend it.
Cool. Any questions from tonight at all? Anyone? We'll take that as a no, which is lovely. Like Emmy said, hopefully see you all at the social tonight, 8:30. Links are on the Sports Diver pages. You all know the drill. See you there. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.